1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab. Let's go. And as always, this show presented by 1 week season. I'm your host, Cheeseman. Happy to be with you. As always, we're building a lineup on DraftKings and using it as a way to look at week 11. It is Thursday, November 14th, when you'll be watching this. And I am now joined by StatATL and Stat. Everyone I've talked to so far, it's been the same answer. Week 10 was bad. It was for me. I know that let's just look at it real fast. Let's just get it up here. Our lineup we built last week, it didn't do well. We both mentioned it didn't do well. I don't think you said you even knew how much it scored, but so quickly, tell me, how was your week 10?
My week 10 was pretty horrible. I basically locked Saquon Barkley, who didn't do anything and was the most expensive player. I guess there were like 2 or 3 guys more expensive than him with like Justin Jefferson and whatnot. But when you spend 8,000 plus on a player and he gets like 8 points or 6 points or whatever he got, not going to be a good week. And they
scored 34. Yeah.
Yeah. So last week, as like everybody who plays knows, like it was a really low scoring week and you only had a few players who scored, 25 points. And so on those weeks, if those guys are somewhat popular, so like Marquez Valdes-Scantling was like 0.3% owned or something like that. Like you didn't need you probably needed Marquez Valdes-Scantling to win a tournament, like to take down like the Millie Maker. But to win a medium-sized tournament, you might not have needed him just because he was so low owned. But somebody like Bijan Robinson, who scored, 25 or 28 points, who was like 15 or 20% owned, if you didn't have him, it was just really hard to make up those points. So he wasn't a guy that was in my player pool, which was just meant you were kind of playing from behind.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so weird when that happens. Like, of all like the good spots that you had all these different running backs in, like, from 7K up to like Saquon at 8.3K, all of them didn't do well. But then Bijan like had 15 plus more than any of them. I think he had 32, and like maybe Christian McCaffrey was close to the next highest there. I'm sure there was someone else, but like no one really else got above like 20. So that's just such a big delta there. So yeah, I mean, again, just one final glance at this stage. Yeah. So, I mean, Herbert did, he did okay. Taysom Hill did okay, but yeah, this was a tough one. So, and a tough week for me as well. I didn't lock Saquon. I locked CMC, but I had a lot of Saquon. Man, not a great week.
It's okay. We move on. You know what I mean? The mantra of the site is 1 week makes a season. So we just we haven't had that week yet on this show.
Not yet. Even with last week's loss, I think we're 5 of 10 now. So 50% cash rate on a single entry tournament. I think it's solid.
I would agree.
I am excited.
Your
for week 11.
expectation is only 20%, right? Only 20% cash. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Theoretically, your expectation mathematically.
So, but I am excited for week 11. And by the way, you did your first look. Did you record that? Recorded on Tuesday. It's probably up by now, but check out the first look from StatATL. Yeah. I mean, how are you feeling about week 11? Any initial thoughts before we jump into building a lineup here?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is going to be an easier week than last week. I feel like there are plays that I, feel much stronger about. I don't know. I mean, I felt pretty good about Saquon Barkley last week, and that didn't exactly pan out. So, I guess we were somewhat directionally accurate. The Eagles did put up a bunch of points. It just didn't flow through Barkley.
Yeah, it just was a weird week. I mean, I felt fairly strongly about the plays that I had. I had, some Herbert at quarterback, a little bit of Hurts. I'm trying to remember the other guys I had now. I've just blacked it all out. But looking at this week, though, week 11, I mean, yeah, I feel like there are some really exciting spots. I mean, you have I know that like you wrote this up in your first look. You'll probably want to talk about this some, but the Ravens have just given up like really good games consistently to quarterbacks and their receivers, and that's just been like a consistent thing. I mean, Drake May is in a good spot at the Rams, right? They're at the Rams, Patriots Rams. I mean, you just have some interesting spots here. Obviously, you have that Seattle San Francisco game there at the top. And then that Baltimore Pittsburgh game right below it in terms of totals, but in terms of the value tier at quarterback, I'm actually really excited about this. So let's jump into DraftKings here. Actually, let me remove that. There we go. Add this to stage. Yeah, man, let's jump into, the red zone, our favorite contest, this single entry. And
yeah, while you're doing that, I mean, yeah, I like a lot of the same things that you talked about. I think this week there's a lot more game environments to be excited about. And I think that there's a couple that upon first glance, people are not going to gravitate towards that I think have like really sneaky upside. So,
yeah, well,
I don't know that we're going to build one of those.
I mean, yeah, what's one of those? Even if we don't build for that, like, what's a game that you think could fly under the radar that you're interested in?
I mean, I really like the Patriots at the Rams. The Rams played on Monday night. They're going to fly cross country for a 10 a.m. Pacific start game. I really think that Drake May is going to win somebody $1 million this year. So I think that that's really sneaky. I do really like that. And I don't think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards Cleveland and New Orleans. And I know they're on the road, but like I think this is a really good spot for not only Jameis Winston and Cedric Tillman and David Njoku, not just the passing, but I think this is a great spot for Nick Chubb as well. So I don't know. I think that there are some really, I don't want to call them sneaky because it's Tuesday. So it's really hard to like know what's going to be popular come Sunday. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of spots that I don't see the field gravitating towards. And I think they're going to have, I mean, we're not in the business here of like trying to predict outcomes, but I think that they're going to have a much higher probability of being a had to have it type game or putting up big tournament worthy scores. And it's going to come at low ownership. Doesn't mean it's going to play out on a 1 game sample size, but if you're a poker player, you're okay being all in as a 60-70% favorite. Doesn't mean it's going to break your way, but you just know you're getting it in good. Where if we played out the slate 100 times or you played out that hand 100 times, it would be profitable for you in the long run. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned kind of like the Cleveland game. You mentioned New England. You also have Denver with Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton, a very concentrated offense. And we were talking about this for a second before we got on. I think it's worth mentioning that a lot of times these teams with lower totals can be more likely to be overlooked, like the Patriots, like Drake May. But just because they have a low team total doesn't always mean that you can't get really great scores from those spots.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great example of that was not this past weekend, but so this was week 10, so like in week 9, where you had the Broncos and the Ravens, and the Ravens won that game like 41-10. But because of how concentrated Denver is, like they only scored 10 points, but Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton like still combined to keep you on a 200-point pace. And it's just because their offense is so concentrated. So that's something that I think sometimes gets, a little bit lost by daily fantasy players. Like they look at totals and they're like, hey, this is a great environment. So like this week, like the Lions have a 30-point team total. And is that a great environment for them? Yes, it really is. But like they just spread the ball out so much between Montgomery and Gibbs and Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta. Like they just have so many options, and most of their options are expensive. Yeah, or an offensive lineman. And they're just not a concentrated offense, and their guys are expensive. So it's just like it's hard for one of their players to put up a big tournament worthy score. And then it's even harder for you as a DFS player to try to identify who that's going to be.
Yeah, could not agree more with that. With Detroit, you'd have to come up with a lot of different lineup combinations to try and hit the right one, and still, you still might not do it. But yeah, man, that is just wild. Like 10 points for Denver in that matchup against Baltimore. I mean, it also just underscores once again how friendly Baltimore's defense is to opposing fantasy offenses. But yeah, 10 points, and they still kept in a 200-point pace. That's wild, and just something that needs to be, is profound. All right, so where do you want to start with this? Oh, whoops, sorry about that. Where do you want to start with this build?
Well, I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit as part of the lead in, but for me, I've written this offense up, or this defense, I guess, up basically every week in my first thoughts, and we're going to attack it again this week. So you alluded to, it's the Ravens, and we're going to target a team playing the Ravens, which this week happens to be the Steelers. And basically why I love the Ravens defense so much to target is if you just go look at what teams have done against them, the opposing quarterback is averaging 314 passing yards against the Ravens and more like 2.5 scores a game. And, that includes some like really poor outcomes. The Bills played them, and I think Josh Allen went for like 180 yards and no touchdowns. So like there are, obviously there's some outliers. And, if you look at last week's game, the Thursday night game where Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, kind of went nuts. But there's also games that are kind of pulling that as outliers on the other side of much lower. So, on average, your quarterback's putting up over 300 yards, getting that 300-yard bonus, throwing multiple touchdowns. They've had some rushing touchdowns. They've had a receiving touchdown from Bo Nix a couple weeks ago, caught a pass actually for a touchdown. So I really like that. And then, let's start there at quarterback. And then Russell Wilson, I think it makes a great start. And then what has correlated so strongly is not just any wide receiver. There have been multiple games where the tight end or the wide receiver too also had a strong game. But the strongest correlation against the Ravens has been the opposing wide receiver one is averaging 27 DK points. And yes, some of that is, with the outlier score from Jamar Chase's 55 points or whatever he put up. But that also includes Mike Evans, who had one catch and got hurt in the first quarter of that game. Yeah. So, again, while there's some high scores, there's also some low scores that are pulling that down as well. So, I like George Pickens. We saw it last year. He has 30-point upside. And so I know he's getting expensive at 7,000, but to me, that is just, that's how I want to start this roster.
Let's do it. Yep. Love it. Pickens is in there.
And so for me, like, again, you don't have to have a bring back, but when I look at this and say, when we look at Pittsburgh, we know that they want to win the game by running the ball. Now, they're unlikely to have a lot of success doing that this week. So, because then the matchup is a nightmare for Najee Harris. I think the Ravens have yet to allow a 60-yard rusher this year. So if they're not having success running the ball, they're probably passing more. But they're probably passing more because the Ravens are scoring points. So if the Ravens are scoring points, I mean, I think you're looking at Derrick Henry, who's mega expensive. But they've given up a bunch of splash plays this year. I mean, like even just the last 2 weeks, like both Darius Slayton and Terry McLaurin had over 100 receiving yards like the last 2 weeks against them. So I know it's expensive. I want to go Zay Flowers here. Like I want to play that this game maybe becomes, a 35-28 game. And, so I think with that, we could consider playing more pieces from this game. We could look at a double stack with Russ Wilson, but he has some upside with his legs a little. And so I think we'll start without that. And if we need some value, maybe we consider like an Austin or, a lower 3K piece or a Fryer Muth or something like that, where if we need to get some value. Yeah. And so I think that's a place I want to consider. And then I think let's look at running back. And when I wrote up the slate and just kind of did my first look, like it jumped off the page to me, kind of did last week too, and it didn't quite pan out for Saquon Barkley. But like to me, the best play on the slate is Christian McCaffrey. Seattle's been gassed by opposing running backs. Christian McCaffrey had 20 touches last week in his first game of the season. He still put up, 100 yards. So they didn't really limit his, touches, and it didn't really limit his production. He put out a strong game. He was involved in the pass game as well. And Seattle, again, has been crushed by running backs. So I really like this. Obviously, we've got 3 somewhat expensive pieces already out of our first 4. So we're probably going to need to hunt for some value somewhere. And one of the offenses we were just kind of talking about was Bo Nix and the Broncos. And so to me, it's Tuesday, so things will probably shift and my perspective will change. But early on, like I feel like they're going to have success. And I want to get a piece. I don't know that I want to have one Bronco in every lineup, but Cortland Sutton looks great. Cortland Sutton is almost 6K, so that's probably too pricey for this lineup. But with a huge pay up running back like Christian McCaffrey, I want to take a look at Audrey Estime for Denver, running back for Denver. Yep. Not a great matchup against Atlanta, kind of middle of the road matchup, but last week, Estime saw 14 rushes, 14 carries, and that was out of 17 running back carries for the Broncos. Sean Payton came out and said, "Hey, like we want to give this guy more run. We're going to give him more opportunity." He's $4,500. I like being able to kind of get 2 running backs here and for that 12 to 13,000. That's kind of the same as playing, 2 6K running backs. And I think this has the opportunity to outscore those, those 2 6K backs. I think you could get 30 from McCaffrey, and I think easily 15 to 20 is within the range of outcomes for Estime. Certainly if his role expands.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Again, at 4,500, you could do a lot worse with a guy getting 14 touches. Obviously, he didn't get a touchdown or anything like that, but if he had added a touchdown, then that's a solid score for a value play under 5K. Rare to find at this point in the season at running back.
Yeah, so we're still kind of pressed for some salary here, like 4,400, but we still have a wide receiver, a flex to fill as well. I mean, obviously we could pay down at tight end. We could pay down at defense. When I was doing my first look, like there weren't a lot of defenses that I loved. We could plug in a defense here. And I think if we were paying down, the only defense that I like below 3K actually does correlate with this lineup, and it is the Broncos. At home, getting a lot of pressure. I think that they're potentially viable. My 3 favorite, defenses are all pay up. They're like the 3 or 4 most expensive defenses on the slate. So I think just from like early first look, I think let's look at Broncos here. And if we have some salary left over, I'd love to get up to the Vikings or the Lions. Like that would be my preferred way to go. But let's kind of see how this shakes out.
Yeah.
So what else? We talked about the Browns, I think, being sneaky. And so for me, the Browns really have like 2. Obviously, we're not building around Jameis here. We've already got a quarterback. But the Browns kind of have 2 really strong options this week. For me, that's either Nick Chubb. I think he's around 6,000. I think that's a viable way to go. He's seen 14, 16, 18 touches the first 3 games back from, a year removed. And, the Saints have been a friendly matchup. And so I think that's potential, but I think what's going to kind of steer me kind of away from that, even though like the Saints have allowed 6 different running backs to amass over 100 total yards and a touchdown against them this season. So I think that's a strong point for Chubb, but I think the guy who's more underpriced, kind of the better value on this team is Cedric Tillman. Since they traded away Amari Cooper, like Cedric Tillman has been operating as the wide receiver 1 in this offense. He's got 32 targets the last 3 weeks. And he's 5,300. And this is a guy that's the last 3 weeks has given you 18 points, 19 points, and 29 points. Like, sign me up for that. Like, he is at least 1,000 underpriced for what he should be.
Easily. So, I mean, look at any of the other 6K wide receivers, and they will not give you. Or, I mean, he honestly, I mean, look at his, I mean, again, I hate to fall into the bucket of being a game log watcher, as, those were always the ones that you tried to beat growing up. But it's like, Justin Jefferson, like, he's averaging the same over the last 3 games as Justin Jefferson, the most expensive receiver on the slate. I mean, he's to me at this point in the week, again, we are full disclosure, we're recording this Tuesday, but this will air on Thursday. He's a lock. I mean, I don't see how you don't just play him on every lineup, because it just feels like his floor for the price is good and his ceiling is just is good as well. So, yeah.
So, Cheese, how does he fail? To me, there's 2 ways that he fails. Yep. One, the New Orleans Saints just get multiple interceptions and completely shut down Jameis Winston. I think that's unlikely.
And Jameis gets benched.
And Jameis gets benched. That's possible. I mean, the Saints are at home. But I think what's more likely way that Cedric Tillman fails is that Nick Chubb scores the touchdowns. Okay. So I think that you could viably say, again, it's Tuesday. You could viably say, I want one of Cedric Tillman or Nick Chubb on every roster I build. And I don't think that would be a poor way of approaching it.
No, I don't. I mean, again, Nick, I haven't, the only reservation potentially with Nick Chubb is like, I just was glancing at his game logs and the matchups have been tough, but like the low yards per carry made me wonder, like, is he the same player as he was before the injury? But again, he had the Chargers in his most recent matchup, and it wasn't last week, it was the week before because they had a bye. And then the Ravens. So, I mean, 2 extremely tough matchups. But if he is, and he gets 15 carries against this much weaker defense, then he could easily put up, I mean, I don't know if he gets to 100 yards, but a pair of touchdowns is not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and I think 100 yards is within the realm of possibility. You give me 100 yards and a touchdown, and that's 20 points, or 19 points, and assuming he gets a catch or 2.
At 6K, that'll do. Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we agree that he has 2 touchdown upside. So,
for sure.
And obviously Tillman does as well. So on this roster, let's go Tillman just because he's a little cheaper. We're probably going to need some salary saving here. So, to me, I think I kind of want to take a shot here and kind of punt on one of these 2 positions that we've got left. And I think the more common way, if you were looking at this and you had 2 spots left, would be to punt at tight end. So I don't want to do that. The last 2 weeks, the New England coaching staff has kind of said, hey, we're going to kind of give these rookies a little bit more of a run. So, you're seeing more run for Jalen Polk. You're seeing more run for Butte. Like, you're seeing them giving the young guys a chance. So I think that I think a lot of the New England pass catchers and Derrick Henry, obviously not a rookie, but is on the field all the time, has had many strong games with Drake May already this season. And he's a sub 4K guy too. So I think a lot of those Patriots are going to go probably completely overlooked. They let people down last week. They weren't super high owned, but they had some ownership. So let's go back to Butte this week. I think he's like 3,500, or Jalen Polk is like 3,400 too. Like they're both Yeah, so that leaves us 5,700. Kind of
All
gives us the
Yeah.
option to pay up at tight end if we wanted. Ideally, I would love to be able to get up to Kelsey or Kittle. I probably don't want to play Kittle if I've got CMC on this build. I mean, I could, but if I was going to play CMC and Kittle, I'd probably play Purdy, who's more expensive than Wilson. So we definitely can't do that. And I can't get to Bowers either. There's no defenses I like better than Denver. So if I was kind of going to come down, I do like Dalton Kincaid, but he is injured, going to be questionable. So I think a little bit of a pay down option I like is TJ Hawkinson. Been, again, played his first 2 games of the season, was heavily involved last week.
Oh yeah.
I think that's a viable option. I think he certainly has, like last week, you add a touchdown to his score, he scores over 20 points, but even without a touchdown at 15 points, he still gave you 3.5, salary multiplier score. So let's throw in Hawkinson here. And what does that leave us with some salary?
1K left.
1K left. So we can go all the way up at defense then. Let's go all the way up to the Lions. They're at home. I like this a lot if Jacksonville is starting Mac Jones again, who honestly really struggled last week with the Vikings at home. Now he's going to be on the road, against an equally good defense as with the Lions. So I think this is a sneaky way to kind of attack this slate. I don't think people are going to want to pay up for defense.
And take the under for Mac Jones passing yards this weekend, because that was the easiest play I think I've ever seen last weekend, under 200 some yards. I think it was under 201 yards. And I looked at his game logs, but it's he's had 70 yards passing in a game. It's this is too obvious. No, this is great. But back to this great stuff. For the podcast, this lineup, we finished it off. So here it is: Russell Wilson at quarterback, McCaffrey, Esteem, Audric Esteem. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that. Esteme. Okay. George Pickens, Zay Flowers, Cedric Tillman, TJ Hawkinson. Oh man, another tough one here. Keyshawn Butte.
There you go.
How you saying that? Is that and Lions defense? So there we go for the podcast. That's the lineup. Stat, great stuff as always. Anything you want to say before we ship this one?
No, I'm excited. I'm excited for a better week this week.
Hey, me as well, man. Very excited. Well, guys, great luck. As we near ever closer to week 11, hopefully your builds are coming together. Stat, as always, thanks for your time, and good luck to you as well this weekend.
Yeah, cheers.